If people don't know who you are, that's a disadvantage, all other things being considered. It just, to me, it is. Not that many people are really good at communicating, who are very articulate at getting their message out, but understand how to do it, when to do it, what's appropriate. It will become clearer who does it well. And that's going to drive people to not want to be that person who doesn't do it well. I think that increasingly in our lives and in business, the reality is there's cameras everywhere. You're being recorded all the time. You have to have a unified presentation. And so I think that the important thing with communication is be direct and honest, because that story will effectively establish you as a thought leader because it makes you a protagonist in the drama.
All right, I'm here joined by Ted Merz, the founder of Principles Media, which is a modern storytelling company. You work with CEOs and executives and help them create social media content. So technically, kind of you could say competitor to us. Before starting Principles Media in 2022, Ted was last the head of the global head of news product at Bloomberg, and you spent 32 years at Bloomberg, starting as a reporter, I think, and working your way all the way up. And I do want to dive into that story of ending that part and starting Principles Media. But anything to amend or correct in that little intro?
No, sounds great. Excited to be here, and thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah. Thanks for joining. And I wanted to talk to you because obviously we're in similar spaces, but you do it more, I would say sophisticated than us. We work with a lot more startups and you come at it from a more traditional communications and journalist background. And so I think you bring a little bit of a different perspective. I wanted to have you on, but can you maybe expand a little bit on the story of how Principles Media was founded, why you founded it, and the backstory with Bloomberg?
Yeah, sure. I like to say the story is easy in a way and hard at the same time, but I started at Bloomberg in 1990. I was the 15th reporter hired for Bloomberg News, and I kind of started at the bottom of the ladder, as it were, summarizing other media publications. And I had the good fortune of being there at a time when Bloomberg itself was a startup and it was growing very rapidly. So about a year and a half after I'd been there, I was tasked with building out the news operation in Latin America. And I spent the next several years opening 7 offices and hiring about 40 people for just that group. So the growth at Bloomberg in the early 90s was incredible. Crazy. And it's hard to picture now because it's a well-known media property and company, but it was small and people didn't know the company. So that was kind of my formative experience. And I remained in the news organization for 16 years, ultimately becoming the managing editor for the Americas. And then I transitioned. I was recruited internally to join a nascent product team. And I ended up spending 16 years in the product group and ultimately running the news product. And I think it's hard to even imagine this now, but think back, Bloomberg didn't have search capability. And that was one of the reasons. When I moved into the news product team, the articles that were published were basically you just paged back if you wanted to find an older article. You couldn't type in words and look for things. But Google had come out and the landscape was changing. And so they paired, I joined another guy and we worked with engineers and sort of built out this news product, which was search capability as well as a lot of other content. And so my career really was a combination of creating content and distributing content. And so I have a little bit of that technology side. I'm not technical. I never was a coder, but I worked with the engineers to build all these kinds of applications. And so that was my career at Bloomberg. And that came to a sudden end in 2022. I was suddenly let go, surprised. And I wasn't sure what to do with my life or my skill set. And I had a lot of time on my hands. So what happened to me quite organically is I started writing. I was vocationally a writer. So I started writing on LinkedIn. And I just started writing stories about my career at Bloomberg, about my thoughts about fintech, the media and technology. I always started writing a lot of stories about my father, who was kind of a greatest generation, a classic figure who's now 98, almost 99. And so I wrote these stories and I got a lot of response. I got a lot of followers and comments and engagement. And organically, I started getting DMs from people who said, we write on LinkedIn and nothing happens. And you write these stories and you get all this engagement. And they said, can you tell us what you're doing? So, that was kind of my introduction to this whole new genre, which, you are in as well, which is telling stories and creating content and raising your visibility and establishing personal brand. And that whole thing I had not been aware of, but it hit me hard. And I realized, I think something pretty profound was that my whole career, and indeed like the last 75 years, companies and people had used PR and they'd used advertising to raise their visibility. And what we're seeing now is this new lane, this new ability to actually become visible by telling your own story. So I got very excited by that. And I was a natural kind of storyteller. So I started to lean into it. And that's kind of the origin. People started calling me, I created a company, and I took it from there.
That's awesome. Our story is actually more similar in a ironic way, because obviously there are so many differences. But I was in New York in 2018. I had just dropped out of college and university because I realized I was studying for other people and not for myself. I was studying physics and philosophy, and I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And so I went to New York because it felt like the craziest thing I could do. And I also just started talking, and I made all these videos on social media, Instagram mainly, Snapchat, Twitter, YouTube. I was doing a daily vlog on YouTube, and a friend of mine told me about this platform called LinkedIn, which in my age group wasn't really a thing. And they had just they were just bought by Microsoft back then. And I just started putting out videos on LinkedIn with no plan. And then people reached out to me and said, this is cool, the videos that you make here, could you help me make some?
Exactly. Right.
And it's hilarious. I have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
You said when you were let go by Bloomberg, you are good at writing, so you just started writing on LinkedIn. You said it kind of nonchalantly, as if it's obvious that if you're good at writing, you just start writing on LinkedIn. But obviously, that's not what a lot of people do. Why LinkedIn? Why? I mean, it seems like the more obvious next step is you find a new job and you apply at a lot of companies, and you don't create content on LinkedIn, especially because you didn't even have that plan to start this media company out of it.
Right. So it wasn't a plan. And when I started writing that, I had no intent or no thought that the writing would bring me work or a career or a job. So now I see that quite clearly, but I didn't see that at the point. I think that I first of all, just wanted to take some time off. I'd been in one company for 32 years. I think the other thing, which is quite interesting, and maybe we can get into, was I was 57 years old at the time. And one of the realities that's facing people of that age is, first of all, a lot of people are losing their jobs at that age. It is really difficult to find a comparable job at that age. And in fact, the whole ageism thing, there is something to companies are not that eager to hire people who are older. So you have to ask yourself, if I had applied for another product manager job or another job, how long was that going to last? Mm-hmm. And I just didn't have a lot of, I thought I wasn't confident that you could get a job that would last another 10 years. Mm-hmm. So part of the thinking was also, when this started to happen, was, can I make my own career and build something myself, which would not be reliant on working for a company? And so I think it's quite interesting, because a lot of people I know who are my age are in a similar position. Like, they've lost their job. They're struggling to find another job. And in terms of the content, that you and I create for clients, I'd say that younger people have an advantage generally, because they're more digitally native and they're more, they have less of a notion that it's an issue to just write online and express themselves. They've been doing it with TikTok or Instagram Reels or so forth. Most of the people my age, and particularly I'd say executives, have a sense that is not only not beneficial, but it's not something you should be doing. Sure. The perception is you should be running the company and not tweeting, or that it's too self-aggrandizing and it's putting too much attention on yourself, and that's wrong. And there's these adages where they say, there's no I in team, and and I put the customer first, or I put the client first. I don't want to front run the client. And I think there's just been a shift. love to hear your thoughts too, but there's been a shift in perception of that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of folks who are a little older are struggle to understand the changing landscape.
Yeah. I'm curious to hear you commenting on that trend because to me it comes quite natural to, create content on these platforms. And like when we think about executive communications and CEOs or founders or senior leaders at now larger and larger companies going on to LinkedIn or Twitter X to post things, is this truly a new trend, or is just the medium changing? And before that, they would be interviewed by a Bloomberg reporter, or they would give a keynote, and it's the same idea. Just now, it's social media instead of a Bloomberg reporter. Like, given that you've seen so much more of this timeline, do you think about it as a major change, or is this just a small nuance that's different nowadays?
I see it as a major secular change.
Why?
Yes, I see it, however, as an evolution and a natural arc.
Mm-hmm.
So let's give you some history. When I started in the business as a reporter in the 1990s, it was very difficult to access CEOs. You couldn't just call them, you couldn't email them, you didn't have their email or their phone. They weren't on Twitter. There was no Twitter. So what you saw was a very institutionalized world where they had gatekeepers of PR firms that managed their access. And in an analogous way, if they had a message to get out, they would typically leak it to a major publication like the New York Times or Wall Street Journal, and they would arrange to be on television like CNBC or Bloomberg. Mm-hmm. And so the playbook that CEOs of my generation are operating under is how you do things. Okay, you work through the channels of the institutions and those gatekeepers, and they provide you validation and distribution. And another thing I tell a lot of people is remember in the 90s when companies had earnings calls and announcements, they weren't typically done by the CEO. So CEOs were not on earnings calls 25 years ago. The CFO did that. Before Steve Jobs, it wasn't normal for a CEO to make a product launch. Steve Jobs and the unpacking of the iPhone, that was revolutionary, right? So you think about that arc. Now, CEOs absolutely have to be on the conference call. They have to give a lot more speeches. They have to, basically, if you're in tech, you have to announce the products like Tim Cook does. Mark Zuckerberg does that too now. Yeah. So there's been an evolution where the CEO has become more prominent, we would say as the storyteller, but as the face. But also what's happened is that they now, because of technology, have the ability to have distribution direct to their stakeholders and audiences. That didn't exist. You had to go to the New York Times to get your message out. So now you can, you can just message directly, as Sam Altman and many other people are doing. But I think this is a generational change. If you're a 60-year-old CEO, you didn't grow up doing that, and it's not the behavior you're modeling, and it's not what you see your peer group doing. Yeah. So when you see Sam Altman doing that, it doesn't make any sense. Okay, it is a weird behavior. However, I think that this is an evolutionary trend. There's no going back, because there's an immense advantage to being able to communicate directly. And let's take Mark Zuckerberg for an example. When the last 4 major product launches from Meta have all been announced with Mark Zuckerberg holding up an iPhone and doing a reel.
Instagram.
And that is crazy because Mark Zuckerberg didn't do reels like 2 years ago, and he owned Instagram. It's like crazy. Right. So Mark Zuckerberg didn't post like a few years ago. It was just a thing that CEOs didn't do. But it's becoming this thing. There's going to be a tipping point. I still look at it like there's very, very few executives who do this in an authentic, natural way. Yeah. That would be like with Sam Altman, Elon Musk, whoever, many people in tech. But I think it's a muscle, and I think it's a skill that they have, it will become part of the job. Just like if you said to them, you have to do a town hall, they'd be like, okay. But if you had said that 35 years ago, like, maybe not. If you had said you have to do a product launch today, they'd understand. But that wouldn't have been part of the job 30 years ago. So I think part of the job is this communication. And that's, where you and I come in is we help them do that effectively, but they have to participate. And that's how I see the landscape that's changed. I think it's absolutely different than it was before.
One comment and one follow-up question. I think what you're saying, you can see that adoption curve where it started with basically tech and startups. I think they were the
Yeah.
earliest, at least in B2B, right? B2C companies, they did that even earlier, where the founders might be present. In B2B, tech startups, and then it's just moving up market into larger and larger companies. You now see some executives of, public companies being out there and creating content. Like I think of Dharmesh, CTO at HubSpot.
Yeah.
And then I'm assuming it will also trickle into other industries. That's not just
Yeah.
tech, but construction and other more boring industries. Where, I mean, in Germany, like there's so many companies, Mercedes and Siemens. I have no idea who the CEO is.
Well, right. I mean, this is a question I'd have for you, but I tell clients if people don't know who you are, that's a disadvantage. All other things being considered, it just to me it is. Like the more people that have an awareness of your name, your image, it's going to help you because you'll be more top of mind. They'll think of you, they'll associate with you. But this is a generational change. Most of the executives are not used to it. They haven't seen it. They don't want to do it. So they'll give you 100 reasons why it's first it's just a startup thing, or maybe it's a tech thing, or this wouldn't apply to cement or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
But I just don't see that. I mean, if you look at the trends for other industries like fashion, celebrities, Hollywood, sports, these have all had similar arcs, right? And the businesses, in a way, business and executives are kind of like behind the curve in this way. They're behind the curve, and I think it's just inevitable. And again, not everybody has to do this, but if you don't, it will be, I think, a disadvantage for you and your company. So you're ultimately going to end up seeing this.
And I think part of that has to do with the adoption curve of social media too, because it used to be true that it is a young people's thing. Now it's obviously not anymore. The example that I give is my father. He is in his 60s. He is the head of IT at a German, partly government-owned company.
Okay.
He will never get another job in his lifetime, probably. And 2 or 3 years ago, he had a LinkedIn account, but he never opened the app. Now, like I see him liking some of my posts here and there, right? And it's like person in his 60s, head of IT in Germany, partly government-owned company, right? And you can now reach these people, decision makers on LinkedIn, and I think that will also drive the adoption by other companies. Now, follow-up question for you: when you see,
have you had your dad on the pod yet or not?
I have not. No. When you see people like Sam Altman tweeting, do you think the skill will actually be learned that all of them will manage it themselves and they just open their phone and they tweet something, or will there still be a communications person, an advisor, their chief communications officer that they will, go back and forth with, and hey, I'm thinking of tweeting this. What do you think? And don't say that. Maybe say it in this way.
Yeah.
How do you see this kind of relationship?
Yeah, 100% for the vast majority of people, there will be a communications person helping them.
Yeah.
Not that many people are really good at communicating. Not that people are Steve Jobs or Sam Altman, who have not just are very articulate at getting their message out, but understand how to do it, when to do it, what's appropriate. A lot of people struggle when they communicate with knowing what is the most effective story to tell or what is an appropriate story to tell. And so as the stakes go up, so I think it's going to be very interesting, because I think for a lot of CEOs, if they don't want to participate, they effectively outsource this entirely. And that, in my opinion, doesn't go well. Is not authentic. It's not helpful. There's no ROI. You have to participate. And I think it's in their long-term interest to have the capability to write and do their own videos. But, if we take Mark Zuckerberg, for example, 100%. He may have held an iPhone and talked for 2 minutes, but 100% the lawyers and everyone else looked at that video. Like
Right.
he didn't just dash that off. Okay.
Right.
So when the stakes are high, look, he may do a quick video at a birthday party, but his advisors are thinking about image and they're thinking about what stories to tell. And I don't think there's anything weird about that.
Mm.
I think that, when lots of us, if we write an important memo, you may run it by someone else, your colleagues, and say, does this get my idea across?
My wife.
And your wife. So similarly, I think that, if I do a video or if I write a post and I'm not sure, I'll show it to a few people and say, does this work?
Yeah.
And so I think it's similar to that. Like it's the executives are going to be they need to be in a position where they can execute this, but they will get advice and counseling and so forth.
Yeah.
And so I do think I compare it a lot more to speech writing. So let's say you're going to give a speech and it's a really important speech. You have ideas you want to get across, but you might hire a professional speechwriter. And I think something else that's missed when you talk about getting help, I think what you and I do is a very specialized skill. I don't think it's PR. I don't think it's general comms. It's more akin, in my view, to speech writing because you have to have a sense of what's going on the platform, what the memes are, like what's appropriate, who's who. So I think increasingly comms is becoming this very complicated thing where you might have somebody who handles the PR, somebody else handling social media, someone else handling speech writing. And I don't think that has evolved. As you, I think, are aware, there was a kind of a big excitement when PayPal hired a person to write the CEO's social
Head of CEO content.
Head of CEO content. I think that makes total sense because I think it's a different job, and I can't write PR, and I don't meet a lot of PR people who can do effective social, and the reason is because they're just different skill sets. When a social post is too promotional, it just doesn't work well.
Yeah,
and you know what I'm talking about. It doesn't work well. It doesn't resonate, and so it's a different sensibility.
I feel like you can tell when a CEO or executive's LinkedIn, etc., sits underneath the PR person versus the brand person.
Okay, yeah.
Because the PR person is very much playing it safe. We want to get the company messages out. We want to just tell the world that we just launched this, that we just partnered with that company, that we're so excited to announce this. That's PR. And the executive's profile is almost just it's a medium to just get the company message out.
Yeah.
And then the head of PR, I think they are much more interested in thought leadership, sharing interesting takes about what's going on, storytelling, some personal stories in there, things that they learned in their career, and some of those are more, a little bit more spicy. Sometimes they might ruffle some feathers. And I personally resonate way more with, maybe I'm oversimplifying things, but with the PR-driven, brand-driven communications than with the PR-driven.
I think that's right. And I think that will become clear. I think the next evolution. So right now, I mean, if I asked you how many, let's just take the S&P 500, for example, how many CEOs in the S&P 500 do you think do social media, any aspect of social media, in kind of an authentic way where you think they're actually writing it and participating?
I mean, love it or hate it, probably the most authentic person is Elon Musk.
So Elon Musk is kind of sui generis, and let's put him aside.
Yes.
Okay? But yes, when you read Elon Musk, the one thing you know is that he absolutely wrote that. And I think the way I think about that is you ask yourself, could somebody have written and published that without his knowledge? And the answer is almost always no. So whether he had help or someone actually pushed the button doesn't matter. It's like they couldn't have done it without. But how many other CEOs in the S&P 500 do that? Like it's really small. And so most of them, to the degree they have handles, are handled, I think, from the PR department, and mostly so the PR department's put in the position of writing something that can't possibly be problematic, and in kind of ipso facto that means it's not going to say really move the ball forward.
Yeah.
It's not going to be memorable. Let's put it that way. It's not going to be memorable. So you end up with all these posts that say, I visited the team in the Frankfurt office today, and go team.
Yeah.
And you're
Great
like,
effort by everyone.
great effort by everybody. And that's like, okay, I think that's fine for 2020. But I think increasingly, as more people adopt this kind of direct communications, it will become clearer who does it well. And that's going to drive people to not want to be that person who doesn't do it well. I think it's very clear. Like if you went to a major conference and a CEO gets up and gives an amazing speech, the next person going up is not going to want to give a bad speech. So I think this happens. This is going to take years, but over time, CEOs are competitive by nature. They're going to want to distinguish themselves through the nature of their communication. It's just, they can't be otherwise.
Yeah. I think what you just said on like, what is the likelihood that you could have posted this through your CEO's profile without them ever giving their input? I think that's a great measure. I was talking to the head of PR at a publicly traded tech company, and essentially what she was interested in us doing was they would have a company announcement that she would write up, like a PR announcement about some product release. And she would want us to basically just create 5 versions of that, one for their CMO, one for their CEO, one for their CPO, one for their CRO, to all say the same thing, but just slightly different.
Okay.
Where I said, you could just run that through ChatGPT and, give it some prompt. And one is a little quirkier and the other one is more serious. But that's exactly what you said. In that post, there is no input needed from the actual CEO or the actual CMO on their take.
I think those are 2 things I look at. I look at, could this have been written without the person's knowledge? And if it can, then it's generally not optimal and not effective, probably. The other thing I look at is, could this be cut and pasted and published by someone else?
Right.
And if that's possible, that doesn't work either. So, all the people who publish these things that say Warren Buffett is the greatest investor and 5 lessons from Warren Buffett, anybody in the world can cut and paste that and put it somewhere else. And it is posting, and you're having an online presence, but it's not memorable and it's not unique to you. So I think the thing that for CEOs to understand and comms people to understand is the opportunity here is to connect with people. And to connect with people, you have to say something memorable and distinct. The goal being that when your executive walks into the next meeting or the next room, the people there say, wow, I saw that post you wrote about X. And they're just not going to do that for kind of 5 lessons of Warren Buffett. They're just not. They're going to do it for something that actually has something memorable in it.
Right.
That's the hard part. That's hard,
We were talking about kind of being authentic, and I think that word is being thrown around very loosely.
Yeah,
I saw this great post you did, and you were talking about the difference between being vulnerable and being honest and direct. Can you expand on that a little bit, if you remember what
Absolutely, yeah. So there's kind of 3 buzzwords in our industry, and I like hate them all. I just, vulnerable, authentic, and personal brand. I hate all of those, but I'll tell you why.
Yes.
It's because it gives you the wrong idea of what the purpose is here and the opportunity. So a lot of people believe, and for some reason this has come up, that you have to be vulnerable and say something vulnerable to get attention or to get, to connect with people. And I think, number 1, it's terrible advice. Number 2, CEOs are not going to want to do that. And because by vulnerable, they understand show weakness. And I don't think anybody wants to show weakness, and I don't think it's a good idea, honestly. And I would draw this distinction. It's not about being vulnerable. It's about telling the truth and telling people what actually happened. Yeah. Like, what did I do and what happened? So I wrote a post about getting fired at Bloomberg. And a lot of people said to me, wow, that was super vulnerable for you to say that. And I guess so, but the point was not to be vulnerable. The point was to tell the truth about what happened.
Mm.
So,
Hmm.
and I found myself in this position where people would ask me, why did you leave Bloomberg? And for a long time, I kind of danced around it. And I just didn't say, I'm just going to, well, it was time for a change, whatever. I came to a point where I was like, I was telling people in private one thing and
Yeah.
people in public something different.
Yeah.
So I think that's bad. I think that increasingly in our lives and in business, the reality is there's cameras everywhere. You're being recorded all the time. You have to have a unified presentation.
Hmm.
And so I think that the important thing with communication is be direct and honest. That doesn't mean, and it doesn't mean you have to tell people everything about your life. And I think one mistake that's made in brands is when people hear vulnerable, they think that you have to talk about some childhood trauma. And I think that's not true. I don't think anybody's interested in your childhood trauma. But they do want to know what you actually think about the business and what's going on. And I think you should be direct and honest about that. And that's to me the difference between like vulnerable and direct.
Right.
And that's
Right.
where I think that it comes down to. And I think most executives are going to be on board with that view of
Right.
it.
Right. It might be the difference between posting, I got let go at Bloomberg and that was a very tough period in my life. End of story,
Yeah.
versus you have a bigger story to tell, which is, the company that you started and why and what you're doing. And one really important piece of context for that is that you were let go at Bloomberg because
Right.
otherwise it doesn't
Otherwise, it
really
doesn't
make
make
sense.
sense. And I think that's a really interesting point. Is that like you don't have to tell people everything about your life here, but if people have a question that is a natural question about why the business is the way it is or why you're there, you should communicate that because it's good in the modern world. It's going to come out like people. What's interesting is that this is one for you too. Is that people used to give these siloed messages. They would do a town hall for employees. They would do a different meeting for investors,
Mm-hmm.
a different meeting for regulators, and a different meeting for the public. And that all broke down with the iPhone because people started recording things and just publishing it, right? And so then you ended up with Google couldn't have a town hall anymore because it all comes out. So I think it's important now your messaging has to be, it can be in different vernacular, but it has to be consistently the same story.
When you work with CEOs and executives, what advice do you find yourself repeating the most? Like, where do they get stuck the most? What insights, tips do you find are most useful, helpful when you work with them?
So most people, the hardest thing for most people is knowing what stories to tell.
Mm-hmm.
And this might explain why I don't think ChatGPT will take away our jobs because there is a writing component, but by far the bigger component is deciding what to write about.
Yeah.
So the number one thing I keep repeating to them or work with them on is what is their story? What are the things they want to talk about? Generally speaking, the biggest problem people have is they think that they need a big idea to talk about. And I don't think that works very well.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about thought leadership and the evolution of thought leadership, that is the way it used to work. So 10, 15 years ago, people would say, I want to be a thought leader. And then they would say, what do people want to, basically they'd say, what do people want me to say?
Mm-hmm.
And they started writing these pieces about, it could be about diversity, it could be about the climate, it could be about a variety of things.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, in most of those cases, they were things that they thought the audience wanted to hear. And I think that style of thought leadership is on its way out. Okay. And what's replacing it is instead of having a big idea, you should talk about your experience, what you have done, what you've accomplished, and what you've learned. And it should be somewhat concrete. And that's a big difference for them. That's hard for them because they walk in saying, I have a big idea about the euro or about crypto or about whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, that's not going to go over well because people can't relate to that. They can't get their head around that.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about what you've done in crypto.
Mm-hmm.
Did you launch a coin? Did you like it? Were you early an investor? Tell me about your experiences. Did you meet Sam Bankman-Fried? Like what? Tell me a story about crypto. because that story will effectively establish you as a thought leader because it makes you a protagonist in the drama.
Mm,
You see what I'm saying? And I
yeah.
think that is absolutely crucial. I think this is the hardest thing. As I say to people, what have you done? Let's talk about that. Let's tell that story, and that story will itself, explain to the reader your passion. So don't tell me about your passion. Sort of show me your passion through the
Yeah.
actual events.
Maybe this is the same advice that you would give, but if a communications leader comes to you, they're a VP of communications and they really like this idea and they work at a big tech company and they just really want their CEO and their leaders and their execs to be more active on LinkedIn because they see the value. They would like to do this. They would like to activate them. What should their first steps be to go down that path or
So you're
evaluate whether they
asking
could?
for like a communication director wants their CEO to be more active,
Yes, and
and
their
in that
senior
case, the
leaders.
CEO is more reticent or reluctant.
Yeah, it hasn't happened up until now. So clearly, either it doesn't come naturally to them, or they just don't have the right program to
Yeah,
support them. Maybe they prodded them like, "Hey, can't you like? How about we post this or we post
yeah.
that?" But there's always some pushback. So they're
Ha-
not the hardest ones to convince, but it hasn't happened yet. So what could they do to get
So
rolling?
generally speaking, the communications people are going to be more aware of the opportunity than the
Sure.
executive
Yeah.
because they have more time. They're looking at the landscape. So in my experience in that case, the most effective thing has been to show them examples of other executives who are posting and posting effectively. And the reason for that is because I still find a big split between the online world and the real world. And so, for example, we were just talking about DHH.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if you're online and in tech, you know who that is.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not, you don't know who that is. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so like a good example, one of the most prominent executives who does online videos is John Gray at Blackstone.
Mm-hmm.
And he does these kind of famous running videos where he
Yeah, yeah,
talks
yeah,
to the
yep.
camera about what he's doing. But when I tell other CEOs about the things John Gray is doing, they don't know. They
Mm,
don't know because
mm,
they're not chronically online. Okay. And it's not their fault, but so my point is when you show them John Gray's video, or you show them Mark Zuckerberg's video, or you show them Rich Hendler's Instagram, they understand it normalizes for them that this is not a strange and aberrant behavior. That these are serious people who are at the top of their game. And moreover, if John Gray can make time to make a video that he posts on LinkedIn on a regular basis, it's kind of like, well, what's your reason? Because John Gray runs a massive company, so you know,
right. I had Irina Novoselsky, CEO at Hootsuite,
yes,
on the podcast, and she said this thing which like still stuck in my head. She's like, a lot of CEOs will go travel to meet with customers. So if you think that's worth your time, I can record a 2-minute video posted on LinkedIn, and
yeah,
hundreds or thousands of our customers and prospects and investors can all see that video. So if
yeah.
you think it's worth your time to go travel and meet one customer,
So what you just said is an incredible thing. It's incredible, and I think the thing to understand about that is that you think about executive time; they meet very small groups and then like mid-sized groups. So a small group would be 10 people in a conference room.
mhm,
A mid-sized group, they're addressing a convention or a conference, 100 to 400 people. Anything that you would say to 400 people in a room, you should say to 8 billion people online.
right.
And any time you don't do that, it's like a missed opportunity.
Yeah. Oh, the sirens of New York.
The
I miss
sirens
those
of New
sounds.
York, yes.
I love it. I do know we need to wrap up here. If you have the time for for one more question,
Sure.
I've seen your obviously you were reporter number 15 at Bloomberg, and I know that you had many interactions with Mike Bloomberg himself. And I've seen some of the leadership lessons that you've posted. What's your favorite Mike Bloomberg lesson, story, the thing that you maybe think back to remind yourself of most often that you apply in your own business or your own life? Does any one come to
Yeah.
mind?
Well, I have a lot of Mike Bloomberg stories, and I write about them a lot on LinkedIn because I think they are management lessons. I will tell you this: I think the most significant thing that I took away from him, there's many, but
Yeah.
compared with other executives that I have experienced in a lot of ways, Mike has as a habit. Generally, when I worked with him as a product manager, he leads with a question. And I think this is the most powerful thing I took away from my interaction with Mike relative to other executives, both at Bloomberg and in other companies.
Mm-hmm.
When you meet with a CEO, because they want to get things done quickly and other reasons, they're oftentimes in this habit of telling you what to do.
Mm-hmm.
This is what we have to do. This is the solution. This is what you need to do now. And Mike may have that in his head already. But usually when I interacted with him, the first thing he asked me is, why is this the way it is? So I was a product manager. He would use the product. And if he found something he didn't like, he would call you over to his desk and he would ask you, like, why does this work the way it does? And this is very subtle, but the fact that you start with a question allows in this case, the product manager, but anyone, the ability to provide input and that is unswayed by any indication of where he's going. And so he can also gauge, is this person on top of their game or not? And the person has an ability to say, this is why we built it the way we did. If you lead with, here's what I think, you already change the environment. And also it's profoundly demotivating to the person who spends all day long building something. So imagine in your job, if you're interviewing, I'm a CEO, and you say, like, the first thing you say is, let me tell you what your story is. That would be the analogy. But you wouldn't do that. You'd say, tell me about your story, tell me about your life, tell me about your business. And it elicits something and it changes the dynamic. And I think it's a leadership superpower.
Yeah. No, I wrote it down. I think it's a great question. Why is this the way it is? I thought you were going to say the first question he asked you is, can I make you coffee?
Well, I did write about that. That is something he does, which I think is extremely disarming and charming, which is, I wrote a story about this where, if you go to his desk, and assuming it's not completely crazy, we come up, he says, can I get you a cup of coffee? And you're like, yeah. But the really shocking thing about Mike in that moment is he does not ask his assistant or someone else to make you the coffee. And that would be a normal move. He goes over to this coffee pot and he pours you the coffee. And then he asks you, do you want cream and sugar? And if he puts it in there and he hands you the coffee. And it takes 20 seconds. But it has it changes the social dynamic. Yeah. And again, one of the things I think about executive leadership a lot is that Mike is very attuned that the leader can dampen input. He's very, very focused on getting information and getting input. And he realizes that by giving you a cup of coffee, and I think this is subliminal, by the way, I don't think it's tactical, but by subliminally, he's opening up and changing the relationship so you will give him more information. Yeah. And I think that's kind of what's behind it all. But I think he doesn't do that. And it's not like he's not Machiavellian in the way of thinking that through. I don't think.
The best tactics always work when you actually mean them and you don't do them as a tactic. Ted, this was awesome. Thank you so much for your time. If people want to check you out, I'll link up both your LinkedIn profile and Principles Media in the show notes. Anything you want to leave people with? Anything I should have asked that I didn't ask, that I glossed over, that needs to be said?
No, if people reach out to me on LinkedIn, if you come to New York, I'd love to get a cup of coffee with you.